morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I know that there's going to be some more people that will probably be popping in the next couple of minutes, but I've uploaded two different versions of the handouts for you. One is the full slide version, and the other is the 6 slides per page. I'm Heather George, and I've got my colleague Don Kincaid here with me. And today is going to be treated a little differently in that we're going to be having a conversation about building state advisory teams. And because each state, as we're learning, are a little bit unique, and each person each state may have a type of team, but it might not look exactly the same across the various states. And we just need to make sure, are they meeting their functions, and what can we learn from other states? So we really want to treat this as an open kind of conversation, although I am recording it because I know that there were some folks from the School Climate SEA awardees that were unable to attend, and so that they can chime in too. Before I officially get started, let me go ahead and share my screen. You can see that okay?
Yes.
All right. Yep. And so Don and I will be going back and forth between this, but let me go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to go through some welcome introductions, go through some just basic norms of how we're going to navigate this. Since there's just a few people, I don't think we have to be as formal with making sure we're always putting stuff in the chat box. We can probably have, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves and talk. We only have an hour together today, so we just want to make sure that we're able to get all of the conversations going. But of course, we're happy to continue conversations at other times with you guys to provide additional technical assistance. So when you do speak up, some of you, I don't know exactly which states you're representing. Half of you I do, and I saw on the registration list, I could figure stuff out on your email address, but we might need to be reminded from that. So we're not doing any specific breakouts or polls today because it's a small group, and then these handouts too will also be uploaded to the national site. This is open to all school climate SEAs, and we're hoping if there's other states too that don't have a school climate, and eventually if there's additional funding and opportunities for that, maybe they'll get some ideas from this. But we're all in different spots with our states, and sometimes with our states, we are really rocking it and things are going amazing. And then the next year there can be an election or some new initiative takes priority and things can slow down a bit. And that's pretty normal, these ebbs and flows. And so I think it's really good for you guys to know you're not alone out there, and other states may have gone through some of these issues too, or may currently be going through them, and how we can work together to learn from each other and support each other. So the other purpose is we want to talk about sharing some various practices, issues that folks are having, but honestly, this is more of an informal discussion. I've pulled together a few slides as a just reminder for things such as some of our guiding principles. Going back to those basics of we want to do what works and make sure that we do it well, making sure to leverage those existing systems. I think that is incredibly important, particularly at the state level. You know, we know that there are so many things that are happening out there, and we all are wanting the same thing, improving the educational experience for our kids and their outcomes. So how do we figure out how to have conversations with folks, get together and be able to pool our resources together, but making sure that everything that we're doing is data driven decision making, and making sure that we're using that multi-tiered framework to help organize all of our supports. So thinking about, and I'm just moving through some of this background stuff kind of quickly because I want to turn it over to give you guys an opportunity to talk, but we do know that leadership teams can inform our best practice at the state and also district levels and school levels as well too, and helps to bring all those different important stakeholders together. At the National Center, we've talked about, you know, obviously there's a team, and that team is also at that state, district, school level. So what we model at the state, we would want districts to be able to model that, as well as districts model that for their schools. But that there's also these agreements that need to happen. And so you think about bringing all these different constituents together, And they have their different priorities, their different lens of where they're focusing. What is this common non-negotiable that we're saying that we're agreeing upon here? And from that, how are we going to make an action plan, implement, and then evaluate how we're doing in a nutshell? But honestly, in order to do that, we know that's what helps us come together to develop that common language. Folks are having a common experience, and we're going to have to do that by being able to identify what's the common vision that we have and values overall. And it's going to take that leadership team to be able to craft that and then be the spokespersons for that. But as we know, there's no two states that are exactly alike, particularly when it comes to their leadership teams. We do also know in the research that there is evidence of effective leadership when they establish that clear vision for what that change is. They've got to have a reason why they're coming to the table. They're focusing on their district schools and students. They're creating and sustaining relationships with stakeholders. They do engage in strategic action planning with database problem solving. They're identifying those appropriate strategies and correcting barriers and goals, and they're evaluating the effectiveness, and they're making sure to invest in that professional development. And there is research that does back that. So thinking about leveraging those existing systems, essentially, we want to have certain outcomes within our states, and being able to identify what those outcomes are, using the data for that, and engaging and examining the current practices, adjusting our systems, where you can see that all is interconnected. But us as a national center, we're providing that support to you guys as SCAs. We'd hope in turn that you guys would be then providing that to your districts, and districts in turn then providing that to the states overall to build that capacity. But on the right-hand side of this slide talks about this leadership team. And as you guys know, it doesn't matter whether it's that state, district, or school, that leadership team, there's an executive function, and that we've got to think about, okay, what is our vision for our team? What is our purpose in what we're doing? And from that, who are the various stakeholders that we need to get to the table to help us with this? What type of funding do we need? How much funding? How are we going to align our various initiatives? What types of policies does this impact, and how does this impact our overall workforce capacity? Which you can see that's more executive branch types of impact from that. The implementation piece of it towards the bottom then gets into what's that professional development that we're focusing on to meet that vision. How are we going to coach folks to make sure that those skills that they're learning and training are able to be implemented successfully out there? And then the data that we're using to evaluate and continue to inform us overall. And that in it of itself is building that local demonstration. And I would say that we do have states that are serving as fantastic state demonstrations, but they all vary in different ways of what's making them really fantastic. And there's always room for improvement. We're thinking about how that implementation cascade going from how we're pulling our folks together so that we can have that best practice across our state. And in 2014, since you guys are all school climate transformation recipients, in 2014 was the first round of school climate transformation grants that were offered. And Florida was one of them. They had gotten it, I believe Michigan had also gotten it then. And if I'm skipping somebody who also got it a second time. But in 2014, first time we offered that. And there were lessons learned that were pulled together about school climate transformation sites at both the states and the district level. So these were the top 10 areas. And that third one was there needs to be an establishment of a leadership team that's overriding everything that's happening within that state or that district. So in these slides, if you download them to your computer and you were to click on that 10 lessons learned, it's hyperlinked directly to the document. So I forgot to remind you guys about that they're all hyperlinked, and I double checked the handouts. It does work this morning. But this summarizes some of these 10 lessons learned. Hopefully, these are probably things you already know about, but hopefully this might also help to open up some other eyes of other folks that you're trying to get on board. But essentially, what we want to do is to try to think about how do we move the work to a scale of social importance where we have just a few sites that are coming on board across our state, to when all of a sudden we have a multiple amount of sites, and it starts to become way more districts are actively implementing what you're intending to do within that multi-framework, as opposed to you're just starting out and trying to get people on board. So this is an example. On the left is, obviously, that's Florida. But you can see if you're in the green or yellow, you are an active district with us. So the areas that are gray, there's only maybe 6 or 7 districts that do not have any activity with us at all within the state. They are in the minority there. Majority of the state is active. So we're saying, like, how have you scaled up? How do we make this at a scale of social importance? If you can't see the writing in the middle, that is Georgia. And I don't expect you to know offhand if that you didn't know the shape of Georgia, because I probably messed around with the shape on trying to make it all fit on one slide. But Georgia had started out with just a few districts initially, and then over probably about 10, at least a decade, you can see that majority of the state now is actively implementing with them. But there's a process that folks go through. And this other slide of the various pictures are the different statewide leadership summits. And I'm highlighting Georgia, and Rebecca, I know you're in some of these pictures. And of course, it looks fantastic. There's been tremendous work that's happened in Georgia. They've done phenomenal on building legislative support. But we all know there's new elections, and you guys have known nationally, there's been a lot of new folks and changes that have occurred in Georgia. So it's a continual improvement process of booting the team, coming back together. Like, does the vision change slightly? Who do we need to bring to the table? But there's lots of lessons to be learned in this process along the way. So Liz, you are from Michigan, is that right?
I am. Good morning.
Okay. Good morning. So I understand that Steve had sent some slides to us that you were willing to share briefly how things are going in Michigan, and then we were going to turn it over to conversations. Does that sound good with you?
Sounds excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Liz Newell. I'm with the Michigan Department of Education in the Office of Strategic Planning and Implementation. And I lead our MDE's My MTSS leadership team. And if you can forward to the next slide for me. Historically in Michigan, as many states experience, our MTSS work was fragmented due to siloed activities across different offices within our agency. And so as we are engaging with SISEP around looking at applying implementation science at a state level and really looking at how we coordinate and align, we identified that we really need to bring our efforts together to have more collective impact. So we established the My MTSS leadership team, which brings together leadership from across all of the offices that you see listed there. And when we were looking at perspectives that need to be included, we looked at decision-making authority across different types of roles. So for example, from the Office of Educational Supports, they house our Title I work and also our continuous improvement work. So we have leadership connected to our title funds, special education representation, early childhood, et cetera. So we brought these members together, and as you can imagine, it took a little bit of shaping to figure out, okay, why are we all at the table and how do we work together and what are our connections to MTSS? So we had a lot of activities looking at our connections to MTSS. When we got into looking at the roles and functions of the team, we actually leveraged the Pbis blueprint to look at those roles and functions and see how they connect to our different roles to establish a team governance of how our team would work together and what our roles and functions would be within our position to support MTSS in the state of Michigan. If you can forward. And as we were looking at the work, we established the following mission and vision. So really the mission of the team to get us to that scaled up vision of MTSS in our state and and our role as a agency of guidance and support to locals to build their capacity. The mission of the team is really to coordinate and provide that oversight. So we're looking at what is our capacity as a state to support. In Michigan, we have intermediate school districts and LEAs, including PSAs, public school academies. And so we're looking at how do we collectively support across the educational cascade. We're looking at barrier removal. Though we have a sponsoring deputy. Sheila Alice is our chief deputy at the Michigan Department of Education. She is our sponsoring deputy. So while she does not sit on the team, she's aware and updated of the work on a regular basis. And we use the state capacity assessment to assess how we are moving along with building our capacity as a state to support specifically MTSS. And she participates in that assessment every 6 months and shares that input. Our next one is actually coming up on February 4th. So we look at supporting the PBIS efforts. So that communication piece within our last state capacity assessment, we identified that we needed to really work on communication pieces. So that's been a piece we've been focused on the last 6 months, as well as our continued use of data to improve as a leadership team. And continuing to focus on how we can differentiate our offerings to districts in support of their MTSS work, especially PBIS, obviously. And so we've been differentiating for offering universal supports targeted, as well as the intensive technical assistance we've historically provided. And the next slide. So this really creates the visual of us all coming together. We have the staff that's within MDE supporting and aligning and connected to MTSS in different capacities, who address not only helping to coordinate the support, but also address many compliance monitoring aspects where MTSS is connected in our state law. And then we have the My MTSS Technical Assistance Center, which was formerly known as My Blissy. And so we come together collectively. And so the School Climate Transformation Grant is managed and supported across these structures. And I think one of the really impressive pieces, and I give tons of credit to Steve Goodman on this, is that he had the foresight years ago that across our grants, it's just not the School Climate Transformation Grant, but all of our grants that feed into our supports to around MTSS in the state are coordinated. So we're looking at the collective impact and the collective capacity we're building across multiple federal and state grants that we receive. And this is when we look at, as we're continuing to evolve over time, this is a snapshot of what our linked teaming structure looks like. I mentioned that our sponsoring deputy, there is the top. So she is our conduit to our collective senior staff, including our superintendent. Then we have the My MTSS leadership team. As part of the leadership team, we also have additional committees that are charged. They're long-standing committees, but they're charged to look at certain elements and aspects of work and then lift findings and conversation to the broader leadership team. So that includes the communications committee, a fiscal committee, professional learning and technical assistance committee. And currently we have an early childhood committee because we've been in the exploration process of developing our childhood MTSS system. And we're moving into a model demonstration with early childhood. All of that then connects to the Technical Assistance Center, who is currently providing the direct technical assistance and professional learning to the field. And I think there we have it, Heather.
I think that was great, Liz. So I'm curious, does anybody have any questions for Liz and the Michigan team of what was just shared?
Hi, this is Sarah Hearn from Delaware. Liz, thank you for your sharing. One question that comes to mind, we are newer in trying to enhance our state leadership team here in Delaware. I've always kind of seen that moving forward, we are definitely going to need subcommittees. So I'm wondering, with your structure here, how did you identify which subcommittees were needed?
A lot of it had to do with looking at our state capacity assessment results and then looking at needs and gaps that we had, and also consistent bodies of work. So for example, the communications piece, because we had historically been so fragmented and siloed, we knew we really needed to boost up our communications. And communications obviously takes focused effort and planning. So that was the decision for the communications committee. The fiscal committee, our work right now, because often the TA center would get questions around, well, how are we supposed to fund MTSS? Where's our MTSS stream of funding? And we could say to them across our consultants, well, you receive a number of different types of funding from the state that can be leveraged to support your MTSS work. But that's easy to say, harder to illustrate. So the focus of that group this last year has been developing fiscal guidance to support their MTSS implementation, which we plan to release next month. So that's been the focus of that work. The professional learning technical assistance, because that's a significant role, obviously, from the state. And so this group really brings PLTA leads from the Technical Assistance Center and connects them to others in the department to look at not only what professional learning are we providing to the field, but what ongoing professional learning do we need to be providing to our state level people at the department, because often there's a lack of understanding of exactly how it really works. So we want to build capacity there. They're also in charge of looking at continued improvements around our MTSS practice profile. We just released our version 5 this fall that illustrates the essential components and what it looks like in practice for MTSS for a district level. And as we look at expanding our offerings within MTSS, that committee is really, they're keeping a pulse on, okay, what's our data look like for what we have to offer? What are some offerings that are needed that maybe we don't have? We know that down the line, math will be on the horizon. We currently don't provide professional learning and technical assistance related to MTSS in relation to math. So again, looking at our capacity, looking at our needs, and then lifting questions and decisions that need to be made to the broader leadership team. But all of the pieces were represented in that PBIS blueprint. So that really gave us a great place to start to say, okay, who's holding these different functions? And sometimes there's a deeper dive that's needed that the full 16-person team, the committees also bring in other expertise, though. They don't have to stick with just the individuals that are on the leadership team. There may be expertise in different offices or in the TA center specific to the part that we're talking about. So they leverage other individuals as well. Does that help, Sarah?
Very much so. So thank you very much.
Elizabeth, hi, this is Rosemary from Rhode Island. And I'm wondering could you please speak to the role of your deputy superintendent in terms of their leadership in helping to engage, across your department, the members of your leadership team and, the ongoing work of committees and especially the professional learning and, the way you talked about not everyone is coming with the same understanding of MTSS. So if you could speak to that specifically, I would appreciate it.
Okay, so the first part, in terms of the sponsoring deputy, the sponsoring deputy is really, they're a champion for us. They help us barrier bust. They help with advocacy. I'll give you a couple explicit examples. So, for example, when we developed the MDE MTSS practice profile, when we were looking at a comprehensive assessment system for MTSS and having these cross-agency conversations, we realized that Michigan had only formally adopted a definition of formative assessment. We hadn't adopted other definitions of assessment that led some ambiguity within our system around what we meant by these different types of assessments that you'd use within an MTSS. And so we then went to the deputy and said, we've run across this, she gave us then the authority to bring together another team to help us define those things more clearly. So in connection to the practice profile. Another example would be when we did define MTSS with our 5 essential components, we worked with her, who then worked with our legislative liaison, that when MTSS is referenced in a couple places within our state law, it matches our 5 essential components. So we have reinforcement between state law and practice. Mm-hmm. So that's that conduit and authority to connection to the legislature. So those are a couple different places where, she plays a particular role, and also helping us look at that capacity piece. If there was a fiscal need that rose that we needed to work with the legislator or legislation, et cetera. Does that give you an idea, Rosemary?
Yes, thank you.
Function. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question was regard to professional learning.
Right, professional learning and, even the deputy superintendent's role in helping to engage the leadership team, which, in Rhode Island lingo looks like a cross-office team of different people across your department, and kind of that balance between, the people who are kind of the converted and the early adopters versus folks who might have a different understanding about MTSS and how that's working through in your Department of Education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our when formerly My Blissey, who is now the My MTSS Technical Assistance Center, when we were in discussions of them being formally recognized by the department as MDE's Technical Assistance Center collectively, our chief deputy was a strong proponent that we really had to look at how do we differentiate our offerings. Because historically, the TA Center provided intensive technical assistance. But that then limited our the access of many other districts. We have 832 districts across 56 intermediate school districts. And so she said, we've got to look at how do we differentiate. So our focus over the last year has really been that differentiation available to the field across universal, targeted, and technical assistance intensive. And so now we're in the process of looking at how do we leverage those pieces that have developed, and also keep in mind all of that professional learning and technical assistance has been converted into virtual offerings because of COVID. Mm-hmm. So now we're in the process of really leveraging and looking at how can those be customized for MDE staff, and that's in the works right now. And we do have some questions that will get lifted to her around kind of expectations across offices of what her vision is of kind of minimum training versus we've started to break it out as kind of like MTSS 101, MTSS 201, and based on the roles and functions that people have within the department, what level of understanding they really should have.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Liz, thank you so much for sharing with us from Michigan. And some of the questions and issues you brought up are very similar to things we want to have the group discuss now. And to talk a little bit about one of those is a state advisory or leadership team. Is it essential? And have you all unmute yourselves and share. We're a small group. You can also share within the chat. But we want to hear from you about whether you have those available within your state, whether you've nurtured and developed those, how they look. Again, Don't go into a 35-minute discussion about it. Just a little bit of information about what you found to work or not work within your state. This is the difficult pause, waiting for someone to jump in and share. I hear someone jumping in, I think. Or trying to. Maybe not. Well, I'll jump in and then you can jump from that. I'll share with you a little bit in Florida. We've had a Pbis project for over 20 years in Florida. But I would say Heather and I would probably agree that we don't have a state advisory team. We don't have a state interagency or interdepartment leadership team. What we do have is a very effective state project that is able to address and incorporate things like school climate transformation, other projects into it, or other initiatives from the state. But we don't really have that. And I think one of the things that we struggle with is while we're very effective at addressing Pbis issues, we do have difficulty with interagency or collaboration because we don't have those connections within our project and directly from our project. We also have difficulty sometimes with integrating different approaches within what we do and connecting to the right people because we do operate in very much silos. And certainly to leverage resources across departments is something that we struggle with. But we've still been very successful in implementing Pbis and doing that across multiple schools in many districts. But I think I do believe there probably is a trade-off in terms of the work you're doing to support and maintain an advisory and leadership team and doing the direct work with districts. And so I think we'd love to welcome that. We're just not quite organized that way as a state. Feedback from other states about how you're organized. Let us know.
This is Sheila Lovato from Montana. And I just was listening to Dawn and can relate completely. We don't have a state advisory team either, but we are in the process of forming one. And the reason is a lot of the same reasons that Dawn talked about is that, for example, we've had a lot of turnover at the state agency. And as a result of that, with so many key people that were involved in Pbis leaving, we've really had a lag in Pbis implementation in Montana. So with the new a new grant that we just received, the new SPDIC, we are using that to form that state team that will be able to advise a regional team and then a district team. And then down to the building level. So we really do see a need for this because there is no sustainability when we have that turnover at the state agency.
Okay. Excellent point, Sheila. I think that's a great thing to share. One of the things added by a state advisory or a leadership team. Good. Anyone else want to share anything before we move on to additional discussions?
In Georgia, we don't have an official state team either, but we have a lot of organizations that really support the work. So we have more an informal state team, like Georgia Appleseed. They're a big proponent of Pbis, and we have lots of organizations like them that support the work. But what scares me most about moving forward is our biggest advocate at the Department of Education has left. And I felt like was the one who really spearheaded bringing all these organizations together. So maybe the time has come to form an official state advisory team.
Good comments, good questions. I think one of the challenges that we have is we can hear from other states and we can see examples of what they've done. And there's always a challenge in trying to identify how that fits within your state structure. How does that fit within? No two states are organized the same. No two states have the same framework, the same history. And it is a challenge to identify how to make it work within your state. But I think it's also critical to realize you can still get there with a different organization. And I think that that's an important piece for folks to realize. And one of the things we found early on in research that we did is states that scaled up didn't always go the same way. They didn't have the same process. They didn't necessarily have a giant state leadership team that led everything. Some of them had very small efforts, but really blossomed in different ways. So just take advantage of what's unique and what's wonderful about your state and build on those is a really critical piece. Okay, we can move to the next question for our discussion a little bit. It's kind of building off the first one, but talk about how any of the state leadership teams that you have, those of you that do have those, how have they really improved or expanded your school climate transformation grant efforts? Some great response that or outcome that you can lay right at the feet of the state advisory or leadership team.
I'm just going to jump right in here. I'm not sure if it's directly addressing this question, but this is Pat Sanborn. I'm in Nevada, and we have a state leadership team. We were fortunate enough to have received the School Climate Transformation Grant in 2014 in conjunction with Safe Schools, Healthy Students federal grant, SDA grant. So, and then we also had Project Aware. So the two SAMHSA grants required a state management team. And so we used that as our advisory team and invited participation from different state organizations and rotated a lot of different topic stuff that we all were focused on. So yes, I think the answer is that that leadership team has supported our school climate transformation efforts, specifically in ways that MTSS now is a state initiative and has been written into legislation. And so we're in the process now of taking our state improvement plan and putting evaluation measures to it within our MTSS action plan. So that's definitely going to expand that by having more focus on MTSS across all levels of the state offices and within different LEAs across the state.
Pat, thank you. That's a great example of, I think, one of the wonderful things that can occur with that leadership team is you were able to move from practice, really good practice in the state. We all know how wonderful a job you all do in that area, but that you were able to move from practice to policy, to legislation, to having it within rule at the state level, which is what you want to do to build that sustainability. And that wouldn't have happened probably without that school climate transformation grant and those efforts to bring that advisory team together. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to talk about an outcome of their state advisory or leadership team?
Don, I mentioned earlier that we have the Early Childhood Committee, and having my MTSS leadership team really created that space to start having bridging conversations between the MTSS TA Center and our early childhood staff within our Office of Great Start, and then also with partners at our Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to look at work that had been done in early childhood to support behavioral outcomes with mental health coaches and such, to then build some common understanding to prepare us to start receiving intensive technical assistance around the pyramid model. So that team really kind of became the conduit to the conversations that led to looking at having PBIS available to our early childhood staff through the pyramid model.
Okay. Good, great example. Anybody else want to share? All right, we can move on to the next one. What were some barriers that you had to overcome in your efforts of building those state advisory teams? Those of you that have a state advisory or leadership teams, I know Liz has shared some of those, but there may be other ones that were real barriers that you just, we had to address this. Until we got that addressed, we were not able to move forward. So share with us some of the main barriers that you've overcome.
In Rhode Island, a main barrier was when, so like Nevada, we have the school climate transformation and Project Aware. And when we wrote those grants, we utilized MTSS as a foundation. And the idea was that we wanted to build specifically capacity within the Rhode Island Department of Education around MTSS, where that work had been contracted out before. And so, to really figure out, how we needed to begin to think about what that looks like. And we're still in the process of that, but building our own capacity to support MTSS as a framework for school improvement, kind of just exactly what Pat said. So I'm very interested in that legislation that you spoke about too, because that's for us is the end game or one of the end games.
Good. Other sharing of barriers that you've overcome. I will share that Florida had one briefly with regard to barriers, and we did have an MTSS team that we had for several years working together. We still collaborate on many things, but for several years we had that advisory or leadership team, and a challenge that we had was what I think, Rosemary, you had alluded to before, is people coming in with very different views of what MTSS was or their experience with MTSS. So we came in from a Pbis perspective where we had been doing it for 15 years. Yet we were working with a lot of folks in that new teaming process that had been talking about it at a philosophical level for a long time, but not the actual doing of it. And so there was a lot of work we had to do to make sure everybody got on the same page with what does this look like? How do we collaborate? What are the connections? What does this look like at a school level? What does this look like at a district level? So there's a lot of groundwork that had to occur. And I think, Liz, looking back at your example of having a real clear mission, having a real clear vision for what you're trying to do is the first starting point. So thank you for sharing that with us. Let's go to fourth. Go ahead.
Don, if I could just add to that briefly, I think even once we had the mission and vision and a formal written out team governance around our responsibilities, there were so many moving parts within our MTSS work. The team struggled a bit to keep track of it all. So one of our newest strategies is we do have a collective My MTSS state action plan now. So across different groups and bodies of work that connects to our MTSS leadership team, we have what the goals, objectives, and targets are across different areas of work connected to MTSS, all in one place, so that all of our leadership team members have a pulse on kind of where we are with different pieces of initiatives, and whether it's the Pbis work, our interconnected systems framework work, the early childhood work, connections to literacy specifically. So I think that's another step that's helped us congeal and understand all the moving parts because there's a lot going on.
It is perfect. You led us right into the next question. We'll send you your fee for leading this into the next discussion later on. But you shared a specific strategy that really helped you build and develop and support that state team. And I thought that was a great one. This really having a strategic action plan and developing it together and having it lead you in where you were going and evaluating whether you were getting there. Great point. What are some other specific strategies that other states or teams have been using to support or build that state team?
In Delaware, we are gearing up to, we're laying the groundwork to do the SSFI, and bringing together, certainly our state level Pbis folks, but also making direct connections with others in other departments at the Department of Ed, other branches, who also, they do have a lot of work that connects with the MTSS efforts in the state. So pulling in some of our academic friends and social emotional learning friends. And we, so I think we're kind of like chipping at the silos, So I think silos have definitely been a barrier for us. And so, Don, in your question of like, how do you overcome? I was like, I don't feel like we've overcome just yet, but I think we're chipping at them and hopefully utilizing the tool of having a facilitated SSFI with the various voices at the table will be of benefit to us to move forward.
Great idea and great definition there from Sarah of how to use the SSFI. That leads right into that idea of developing a strategic action plan and getting everybody on the same page to do that, to really assess where you're at, what's working, what's not working, and to evaluate which of the things you're identifying as barriers or areas to work. How do you make a decision about what takes precedent, what things are most important to be done as a team? So that's a really good tool to help you do that. Great. Who else would like to share?
Don, this is Heather. I was going to share on behalf of Georgia because I think this might have occurred before Rebecca came into this position. But one of the things they did to build their team long ago was to develop a paper that had kind of their various data that they had successes in already, along with this charge of, and wouldn't it be great if we were able to do this, this, and this better? And it was essentially this paper that was hand delivered by some of their top leadership who was on board with all this, who would reach out to the various legislators, reach out to the various directors of the different agencies to get them to the table as state leaders. So when they came together for 2 full days to talk about what's the vision for Georgia, it was really evident. It was that everybody was on the same page. We all want kids in Georgia to succeed. So what's it going to take? It wasn't about, what political party they were affiliated with, what department they were from. It was, what's it going to take for all of us to get this done? Because we all want the same thing for our kids in Georgia. And that to me was a beautiful example where people weren't getting into this. Oh, but you're Republican or you're Democrat or you're, from this agency and you guys historically have done this. There was none of that occurring because they kept that focus of what they wanted as their outcome. And they realized it didn't matter where they were coming from. They were all working towards that same goal and they needed to work better at it. And that was, it was just a beautiful example. It was scary as all get out to have all these head people together. But, and of course, because there's been so many people who've changed, over the years, it's having to kind of revisit and go, is that the best approach now as they try to rebuild their team to go that way?
And Heather, I would just like to add to it that, one of the strategies were the summits where all this work occurred. And that's really where I feel like that the informal state advisory team had its birth. And, so, like I say, since we've had a big change in leadership at the department, we're going to have to look at that now. It might be time to make an informal team a formal team.
Heather and Rebecca, that's a great example too of, be careful. The goal is not just to bring together 15 people from different departments and let them think about all kinds of various things. What you did was you primed them and you did some nice antecedent manipulations, some antecedent support so that they knew what they were coming together with and they were on the same page before they got there. Because if not, it would have been a very difficult thing to everybody would be maybe coming in with their own agenda. You helped create that agenda and created a consensus before they ever got together. I think that's a tremendous strategy and something for us to remember and think about. Okay. Let's go to the last. Go ahead.
If I can just add one more piece for consideration that I found is that all of us have a ton of work to do in the state agencies. And there's always this cost benefit analysis going on in our heads about what meetings we're attending. And so I think one strategy to consider is not only how can those individuals that sit on the team with an intentional purpose contribute to our MTSS system, how can our MTSS system contribute to their primary work as well? So a couple of examples. One of the leads for our continuous improvement process sits on the MTSS leadership team. We just redesigned our continuous improvement process and developed a whole new platform. So through our collaboration, our TA staff was able to work with the continuous improvement staff looking at how can we build MTSS aspects into the continuous improvement process and platform. So that was a mutual benefit across two huge initiatives in the department. So again, it strengthens the team because it's that mutual benefit piece. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunity to kind of, and the same would be true like with our mental health representation. Okay, as we're working on our mental health aspects that aren't all about MTSS, but how do we leverage them together to have more of this collective impact? And that the benefit is the field sees us aligned and united, and we're no longer getting these messages from the field like, okay, this office says this and that office says that, and who do we listen to? So I think that's another piece to look at as a team.
Okay. Great point, Liz. I mean, it does make a lot of sense that you're going to have greater participation and buy into that if those participants see that it's not just about we want you to contribute to our goals, but also how can we support what you do better? And I think that's a win-win for both sides. Excellent point. Let's go to number 5, which is to think about what have you done to support engagement and involvement from your team members. Those of you that have those advisory and leadership teams, how do you get, again, Liz, you led right into this with a wonderful idea for that you've got to have a win-win for everybody participating, that they see that being something that impacts their work, not just contributing to your work. What are some other things you've done to support engagement and involvement?
Liz, I'm wondering, how often do you guys meet in Michigan? Because I know that if we keep it kind of alive and people tend to continue to stay engaged.
We meet once a month for 2 hours, same time every month. So, it's on your calendar year round. Because we do have a volume of work that we try and knock out in those 2 hours, we try and pace it. People know what's coming up, so to speak. One of the things in relation to this question around engagement and involvement, one of the things we realized that the state capacity assessment wasn't doing for us, it was helping us to look at the capacity we were building across the state, but it wasn't necessarily designed to help us look at our own team functioning. So we did develop a leadership team survey that helped us look more at kind of functional aspects of our team. And we conducted that survey for the first time this fall. To look at more specifically the needs of collective team members and how to strengthen the team on a more routine basis. So we'll continue to do that twice a year as well. So that's another strategy to kind of get a gauge of kind of where people are at or how they think the team is functioning, not just our MTSS system, more broadly.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, if you or Steve might be able to share that with us, that'd be great. I think there'd be some other states that would like to see how you assess team functioning. Okay, very good.
Happy to share.
Other things you've done to support engagement and involvement.
Or maybe there are ideas you want to bounce past people and you haven't tried them yet.
Pat, are you sharing? Because it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Yeah, I was muted on my phone as well. So
Okay.
one of the things we've done is, well, in the past, not so much recently since the pandemic hit, but we were meeting monthly, and then every quarter, so every 3 months, we would have an extended meeting where we would have more deeper conversations and dialogue about different topics that affected our partners across this, across the state and across the state departments. And we would provide a very big lunch. And so that was really helpful. Seeing we had a lot of participation, and the leadership team would prepare something, and we'd have this big spread. And it was actually quite fun, and we got to talk with one another. We, networked a lot more, because over lunch, people would chat with one another and find out about what they're doing. So that was really helpful. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do it much lately because of the pandemic, and we're doing everything by Zoom.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of those that know me of food, and think it's a wonderful thing to make meetings work better. We have time for maybe one more person to share something before we move on. Okay, then we'll move on then. Thank you all for sharing. And again, the notes and other things will be shared with you and at the end of the session. Thank you.
And just to give you guys a heads up, I see that, Pat, thank you for putting the link to the bill that you had discussed. So that's in the chat box right now for you guys to download. Just wanted to highlight to you guys some resources. Some of you have already talked about them, so you'll be familiar with this, but just as a reminder, the International Association for Pbis is having their annual conference in March. It is going to be fully virtual, but I know in 2022, they're planning to be face-to-face. It will be in San Diego. But if you haven't had a chance to go to this is always a good opportunity to hear what other states are doing, or what other people across the world are doing too, in relation to positive behavior support, or that multi-tiered framework in general, and to gather ideas and build networking. As you guys are familiar with the National Center, so we are your TA provider for the School Climate Transformation Grant. And just to remind you, if you go to the topics on the website page here, you can see that there is a special link specific to school climate transformation. So this webinar, for example, will be posted at that link there, and any other webinars and any other material that comes from the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools, as well as from us to help you guys implement your grant effectively. And also, as a reminder, there's another drop down for specific to district and state, and we continue to populate that. So given that you guys are coming from that lens at state, that would be probably one of your go-to areas there. If you see that something's missing and needs to be there, please let us know, because our goal is to provide effective technical assistance to you guys, and we want to make sure that it's useful information. If we're missing something, we need to know so we can build it. Also, we have a virtual Pbis leadership forum. It's typically been in Chicago each year. In 2020, it was virtual. 2021, it's also going to be virtual. But I wanted to highlight, there's a session that we did, and in fact, Georgia was one of the, Georgia and Florida were the exemplars for that session, but it's C2. But you can go to this website and be able to see the recording of that webinar, but it talks about specific to the state leadership team process. Also want to remind you guys, because as a school climate transformation grant, you might be hired based on that grant, but may not have necessarily been working directly with the state Pbis project in your state. And just know that the folks that have been identified from your Department of Ed as the Pbis state coordinator, some of them are your names are up there on this site. But if you haven't had a chance to work directly with your Pbis state coordinator, we really want to encourage that, because again, we want to try to help de-silo, help try to expand and leverage our resources, and essentially get bigger bang for all of our efforts. So if you need assistance with that, because we do know that there's always histories, there's always background, there's different personalities in each state. If you do need assistance with helping navigate those conversations with some of the other players, please contact us at the National Center. You've got a TA person, a center partner who's identified to your state, and they can assist also too in helping to navigate those conversations. Some things I just wanted to highlight to you, if you're not familiar with them already, is we had worked together with CISUP as well as the MTSS Center, the Lead for Literacy, and NCII on developing a state guide for returning to school after COVID. There's a guide specific just for the state to focus on. We have one for district, we have one for school too, but that one in particular is focusing just on state. We had also developed one on the 4 key actions for SEAs to support implementation of MTSS. In fact, Steve Goodman was one of the folks who was leading. In fact, he was the lead author with that, but that's some great information as well. And as Sarah had talked about from Delaware, that the SSFI, that as a tool could assist in the planning, could also help assist in opening up the conversations with some other players in your state as well of the different things that need to get in place to build that infrastructure in your state. So it's not treated as just a grant. And when the 5 years are up, then they'll do something else. Because obviously you want everything to sustain from the efforts that you're putting into it. And we've recently developed and posted the Pbis evaluation blueprint. And that is geared for states in particular or large urban districts. So that might also be a useful tool for you guys as well. We've got examples of evaluation reports that are up on the national site, as well as additional webinars specific for folks working at that state level. So, and I think a quick, there's so much information that's on the website. You could always go to the search button and just type in state, and that gets you right to, it populates all the information for you. And so, do you have any questions for us or for anybody else? Well, just know that you can always contact Don and I, as we're partners with the National Center on Pbis. We can help connect you with folks within your state. We also can help problem solve any issues. You can send emails to us, or you can find us on the pbis.org site. This stuff will be posted. Feel free to share it with other folks on your team if it would help them to build awareness overall. And just know that congratulations on getting the School Climate Transformation Grant. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they will offer another round of this because Florida definitely wants to go after it again. And it's a great opportunity to build that multi-tiered framework in your state. And especially if you have existing Pbis activity within the state, it's a great way to help leverage and spread the positive effect. So if you don't have any other questions, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and look forward to continuing working with you.